I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and with me today is the new BMW 5 Series. But the one I'm reviewing isn't just any 5 Series, this is the new i5 M60, a high-performance dual-motor all-wheel drive, fully electric iteration of the new 5 Series, BMW's luxury mid-size sedan. Now, if you're a subscriber to Chasing Cars, you might know from some of our other BMW reviews of late that this brand is embarking on a philosophy that they call power of choice, effectively that you'll be able to buy petrol, maybe diesel in some markets, hybrid and fully electric, all within the same model range. And that's exactly what we're seeing on the new 5 Series, much like with the X3, X1, X2, 4 Series Grand Coupe and the like. Personally, this philosophy appeals to me. Today, we're going to be reviewing the i5 M60, but coming up on the channel soon, we'll also drive the petrol 5 Series and possibly the sweet spot of the range, the rear-wheel drive i5 eDrive 40. But for now, let's get crack on with this frozen black M60. Before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. One important factor to note about the new 5 Series, whether you're buying petrol or electric here in Australia, is that this model has effectively been repositioned. It's now more or less a mini 7 Series rather than a bigger 3 Series. And I think this is probably the first model where that truly feels like the way it is. The last 5 Series was pretty plush, but it didn't approach a 7 Series on things like ride quality at the end of the day. This car does, as we'll find out when we take it for a drive shortly, and inside you can tell loads of obvious cues that have been lifted from the cabin of the latest 7 Series, a car which has performed well here on Chasing Cars for being very much fit for purpose. So you can see a lot of these textural glass elements which incorporate extensive ambient lighting are almost a direct lift from the 7 Series and i7. There's big pieces of trim in here that give the cabin some interest and some lift and some texture. Things like these really cool geometric shapes in the Bowers and Wilkins speaker cover. Those speakers are actually standard on the M60, all sort of approach that very luxurious feel. And that's important because BMW has really jacked the price up of the 5 Series. The one we're sitting in here is over $215,000 before on-road costs, but the only option on this car is actually the frozen paint outside. Everything else you're looking at here is standard, so the level of spec for Australia is high. That being said, the rear drive i5, which is $155,000 before on-road costs, looks like a much better deal if you don't care as much about lunatic level 0 to 100 times, which is something the M60 is very good at indeed. But if you want petrol, you're still paying like 115 grand for a 520i. So this is a more expensive car than ever before. Thankfully, it feels beautifully built inside. That is the major difference between the new 5 Series and cars like the Mercedes E-Class or EQE. The Mercs are not bad, but that's about as high as you can put it. Here in the BMW, you can't do that thing people do where they go and like try and press on things to make them creak, because this car is so well screwed together, it just won't do it. Everything is virtually perfect in here. BMW is surfing an incredible wave of high build quality at the moment. I hope it continues for some time because it's been years now since we've seen a really badly built BMW inside on the channel, and this one is another one that we can chalk up in the positive column. Now, this particular car has been specified with the Silverstone and Atlas Grey Merino leather. So this is not a vegan interior, but this all feels absolutely beautiful. Loads of electric adjustment, heating and cooling in the seats. This is a comfortable place to spend time. Steering wheel, maybe a bit naff with the red stripe at the 0 degree mark, but the M stitching is nice. Flat bottom's cool. You've got one paddle here for boost. Oddly, paddles are normally about regen in EVs, not the case with the BMW, but it's a nice looking wheel and the whole interior presents quite beautifully. You've still got things like this crystal iDrive selector down here, so you don't have to use it as a touchscreen if you don't want. Wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, everything works quite well indeed. Dual phone chargers, wireless is nice touch. Bin between the seats, decent sized door bins, and all these materials are suitably plush. Simply put, this is one of the best back seats in any EV, sedan, SUV, whatever shape you want. You can see how fast BMW is learning here. This is much better than the back seat in the i4, for instance. Why? Because even though the floor has to be high in order to accommodate the i5's large skateboard battery, which doesn't even have what Porsche call foot garage cutouts in order to give you some toe room, the seat base has been set very much appropriately in order to support the legs of people back here. So right now, I'm more than just comfortable. I actually have a perfect amount of leg support in the back of the i5. So that's an incredible achievement in an EV, and it's just not that many cars we've seen so far that are fully electric and are able to get backseat passenger comfort right. So well done, BMW. We do have air vents, USB-C ports, and 2 extra climate zones back here as well. We don't have heated seats, but I guess you can't have everything, can you? Got little tablet holders here in the backs of the seats, which is kind of cool. You got to get a little attachment and you can put your device in there. And the door materials and stuff all continue to be very plush back here. There's a flip down armrest, 2 cup holders in there. You can see out well, it's spacious, it's comfortable. What it is not, however, is a station wagon. There is an i5 Touring on the way, which will be a wagon version of this electric sedan. I think that would be so rad. I would love to see BMW sell it in Australia. They do still sell one wagon, the 3 Series Touring, but not holding out too much hope because the regular 5 Series Touring departed several years ago now. Moving around the back of the i5 now, there's a couple of things to note about the styling of the new 5 Series sedan, which I think can look a little bit ungainly in photographs from some angles. The best tip I can give you is to go for a dark color, and that's because the bottom sills of this sedan are rather unusually painted gloss black, probably because the i5 sits a little bit high in order to accommodate that big battery, which can create a lot of visual weight in the doors of an EV. So to combat that, BMW have painted the bottom in black, but in a lighter color, that makes it look a little bit odd. So I would say go for something like tanzanite blue or a dark gray and you won't really notice. This frozen black is certainly a menacing color, but it's difficult to take care of. It almost always looks dirty, so you're constantly cleaning the car, so I'd probably avoid that. I do like the fact that this one actually maintains its silver badging. It doesn't have the M Sport Pro Pack, and I think it looks a bit more elegant for it. Now, this is a sedan, so we have a typical sedan boot with a power tailgate. You expect that at this kind of price. And it opens up to reveal decent practicality, 490 litres, which has been enough for all of our camera gear and some suitcases and that sort of thing. So I think for most people who are buying a sedan and not a large SUV, this sort of boot space will be enough. Now, underneath the boot floor, you've got a really deep additional bin. There's charging cables in it now, but you could definitely get a couple of canvas bags in there without an issue. What would be more practical? Well, an iX3 is a little bit more spacious in the back, though less luxurious and not available with all-wheel drive, at least at this point. The i5 Touring, which is coming, would be even better. Really hoping we get that. What about the range, charging, efficiency, and servicing of the new BMW 5 Series? Well, if you go for the M60, honestly, you're making your life a little bit more difficult than in the 520i, which is the petrol car, or the i540, which is rear-wheel drive. And that's because BMW's dual-motor all-wheel drive cars are definitely less efficient than the single motor, and that's certainly the case with this high-performance M50. Like the rear-wheel drive i5, you get an 81 kilowatt-hour usable battery in this car, but consumption is a little high. Over the last couple of days, road testing this vehicle in Melbourne and country Victoria, we've averaged 22 kilowatt-hours per 100 kilometers, and that's only good for 370 kilometers of range, which is coming up a little bit short in this kind of segment. So for me, I would definitely put my money towards the rear-wheel drive version. You save a vast sum, like almost $70,000 by not getting the all-wheel drive. The driving dynamics may well be sweeter. We'll find out at a later date, and your real-world range will be considerably greater. However, the i5 does have a high peak charging speed on DC charging. It's also got high speed AC charging as well. So in terms of replenishing the battery, it's not bad. The warranty, 5 years on the car, 8 years, 160,000 kilometers on the high voltage components. All right, so taking off in the i5 M60, we've come out to one of my favorite bits of regional Victoria, just outside Melbourne actually. They're so lucky down here with some great driving roads. In Sydney, we've got to go a bit further. But in some ways, the M60 version of the i5 would actually be easier to live with if you lived in Melbourne, because if you decide to take this sporty sedan out to find a good bit of blacktop like this, you kind of need it to be a bit closer to the city, because the M60 is a bit challenged on real-world range. I think the equivalent in Sydney is, if you were sort of driving to the country and you're going to the Hunter Valley or you're going to the South Coast, you'd find it okay, but any further than that, onto the ski fields or something, it's going to be a little bit of a problem. And I think this car probably deserved a battery which is maybe 10 or 20% bigger, just to give it that additional autonomy, because it is so great to drive. You will want to take it well away from the city and find fantastic bits of road, because the chassis on the new 5 Series is excellent. Like the old one, it uses the cluster architecture platform, but it has been refined and further developed, and of course the availability of fully electric models really goes to that point. And the M60 is just a really fine saloon to drive, and as I said before, in the interior it is more miniaturized 7 Series than engorged 3 Series these days. There's a lot of similarities between the i5 M60 and the i7 xDrive 60. Those similarities are far more than skin deep. They really come to the way the car drives. But I do think that even if the 5 Series feels like a smaller 7 Series in terms of luxury, it's still usefully smaller in terms of its footprint on the road, so you can be a little bit more assertive with the 5 Series, and it's really quite rewarding to drive in that it's so satisfying, it's so cohesive, and it's so consistent in its driving dynamics. What it's not is sort of crazy and out there and slidey and oversteery. It's a big, heavy sedan. It's more of a GT car, it's more of a bruiser, and that's the way you can enjoy it, just through the really wonderful control surfaces, the good steering weight, the brake and accelerator do exactly what you would want them to do. And I say that as if it's some kind of revelation, and it kind of is, because to be completely honest with you, maybe not most, but a large share of EVs out there still have dynamics which are a little bit weird, whether it's that the braking feel through the brake pedal is not up to scratch, or whether it's the body control isn't right, or the ride quality isn't that great. The new i5 manages to avoid all of those foibles. It's just incredibly well tuned. You can tell that a very significant amount of work has gone into polishing this car into a machine which can command the sorts of prices that BMW are looking for here. So the M60, it's got a lot of performance, 442 kilowatts of power, claim 0 to 100 is under 4 seconds. I certainly believe that that would be achievable in this car. It actually manages to not feel overpowered on the road. It's approachable and easy to drive and linear. The throttles may be a little bit touchy at low speed, but I do think the Goldilocks spec may well be the i540, which is single motor rear wheel drive. It's certainly not lacking for power. 250 kilowatts of power and 400 Newton meters of torque on the rear axle is plenty. That's of course going to reduce the weight over the front axle too. It's going to extend your range. It's going to be more efficient. And most Australians buying a sedan like this, wow, it's faithful through the corners, just as an aside. Most Australians buying a sedan like this, they don't need all-wheel drive, so do consider the 40 and save yourself that 60, 70 grand in the process. 520i, I haven't driven it yet, but my colleague Kurt Dupre has done so, and he actually says that from a driving enthusiast perspective, the 520i petrol 2-litre turbo is the peachiest 5 Series to drive. It's much lighter, so it doesn't need as much suspension wizardry to make it stay on the road. Here in the i5 M60 in particular, we are running with basically the old 5 Series touring way of thinking about suspension, steel on the front, air at the rear, and it works tremendously well. But there is a lot going on, of course, adaptively damped steel and airbags. But you know what? It works. It may require some upkeep over the years, but this vehicle has excellent turn-in, it's crisp at the front end, and yet it's always satisfying and yet compliant and comfy. I wouldn't say soft. You do know what's going on, but it just never feels like hard-edged or uncomfortable, this car, which I think is important. In an M60, much like the beautiful old BMW M550i, which I loved, you want that staggering performance coupled to cosseting ride, and that's exactly what you get here. For me, this car is up there with the best EVs in terms of driving dynamics. I think the Taycan and Audi e-tron GT are probably still close to the top. The BMW 7 Series is excellent too. This is usefully smaller. We don't get cars like the Tesla Model S in Australia and haven't done for a number of years, so I don't really count that in my professional experience. But the 5 Series is really an outstanding vehicle. The previous one was decent if you kept it on smallish wheels. BMW have done a great job of now letting you buy big wheels like the ones fitted to this M60 while keeping the ride almost uncannily satisfying and competent, and that's really quite an achievement in a fully electric vehicle. As for the rest of the dynamics, very pleasant, very quiet. Refinement is strong. The safety systems are all present and accounted for, but they're not annoying. They're not in your face, they're not tugging at the steering wheel. You don't have a speed warning bothering you. It's there. It sort of flashes at you if you are slightly over the speed limit momentarily and accidentally, but it's not binging and bonging at you like in a Hyundai Ioniq 6, for instance. I think BMW have done a wonderful job of interpreting the regs that they need to follow without making them too in your face. Not easy to do for a 2024 model year car like this. So yeah, I'm satisfied with this car. You can probably tell. I do think it's very expensive. I think it's just as well it's got this depth of engineering in order to justify that kind of price. But you know what, for me at least, the i5 M60 does justify its price. About the only thing that could make it better is if it was the forthcoming wagon version. So that's my opinion of the new BMW 5 Series, in particular the i5 M60. We're really starting to see that development in EVs starting to fly now as billions of dollars in R&D budgets unlock some pretty superb engineering. This car is always comfortable, yet it's aggressive and hardcore when you want it to be in the twisties. The performance is electrifying, for want of a better word. The build quality is superb. The efficiency could be a little bit better in this all-wheel drive, which is why I think the rear-wheel drive car is probably the one to go for if you want an electric 5 Series. And the fact that all of this has been done on a platform that isn't even dedicated to EVs is quite staggering. I think BMW are doing a pretty good job at the moment in terms of their product development. The big catch, it's expensive, particularly if you want the M60 at over $215,000 before on-road costs. This is a niche car. But you know what? You do kind of get a sense of where your money is going. And I think you'd need to spend up bigger on something like a Porsche Taycan to get a better electric sedan experience in this car. Not much else comes close. That's my opinion. Let me know yours down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.